Well, the playoffs have finally arrived. It's a great time of year if you're an NFL fan. Wildcard Weekend this weekend, 2 games on Saturday, 2 games on Sunday. Of course, we'll be previewing all these games individually as the week goes on here on BETDAQ NFL. I would like to talk about the weekend as a whole now, though. Starting with the Saturday games, the most interesting game to me on Saturday is the Cincinnati at Houston game. Now, the Texans are currently installed as a 4.5-point favorite on BETDAQ, 43 the total. Houston has not been playing well at all the last month. I know I'm not breaking news to anybody out there who's been paying attention, but the Texans were 11-1 at one point. They've lost 3 out of their last 4. I mean, not only do they not have home field advantage, if they'd have won last week against Indianapolis, they'd have home field advantage throughout the playoffs. They now have to play this weekend. They didn't even get a bye. So a total collapse at the end of the season. And a lot of people have talked about the holes in the Houston defense. You know, you rewind about a month and a half ago, and really, there was no obvious weakness to this Houston Texans team. They were top 5 in the NFL in both total offense and total defense. But it was a game against the Jacksonville Jaguars in the middle of November where really the cracks started to emerge with the Texans. They were shredded. Their secondary was shredded by a bad Jacksonville offense. The next week they played the Detroit Lions. I believe Matt Stafford passed for over 400 yards on the same secondary. So ever since then, people have been looking at this Houston secondary as possibly the weakness of the team. But really, over the last 3 or 4 weeks, a bigger weakness has emerged, and that is the offense. After looking so good through the first half of the season, what has happened to the Houston Texans offense? They've lost 3 out of the last 4 games, as we've mentioned. In those 3 games, in those 3 losses, they managed 16 points last week against Indianapolis, 6 points at home the week before against Minnesota, and only 14 points 4 games ago in that blowout loss to the New England Patriots. So they just can't score right now, and last week in a must-win game against Indianapolis, only scoring 16 points. I mean, the Colts do not have a very good defense. Now, Cincinnati, Houston's opponent this week, has a very, very good defense. As a matter of fact, I'm not sure people realize, people who haven't watched Cincinnati play a lot, I'm not sure people realize just how good this defense is. Over the last 2 months, Cincinnati has been as good as any defense in the NFL outside of maybe San Francisco and Seattle, but maybe not, because San Francisco melted down and allowed 40-plus points to Seattle. Cincinnati's last 8 games, they are 7-1. They're also 7-1 against the spread. In those 7 wins, they have held every single opponent to 17 points or less. And the only opponent they allowed to get to 17 was the Baltimore Ravens last week after the Bengals pulled a lot of their defensive starters in the second half. So you remove the Baltimore game last week, and they had won 6 of their previous 7 games, and in all 6 of those games, they had held their opponents to 13 points or less. So the Cincinnati defense has been absolutely dominant lately. And as we said, the Texans have had trouble scoring against anybody. 43 is the total in this game on BETDAQ, and you'd have to have an early lean towards the under, wouldn't you? Because Cincinnati has not been spectacular on offense, and even though the Houston secondary has had problems, as we mentioned, the Houston defense really hasn't been playing all that poorly the last 2 or 3 weeks when they've lost these games they needed to win. It's been the offense that has really let them down, so I'm very interested to see whether that Houston offense at home can pick it up against one of the NFL's better defenses. Now, the other Saturday game, Minnesota at Green Bay. Green Bay, a 9.5-point favorite. Nearly everybody, myself included, expects the Packers to win that game. Minnesota beat them last week in a great game. Just not sure Christian Ponder, even though Ponder played well last week, not sure he's ready to go on the road and beat Aaron Rodgers and the Green Bay Packers. 9.5, the number in this game. One thing I do want to mention about this game and really 3 of the 4 games, every game except for that Cincinnati-Houston game. This game, the Indianapolis-Baltimore game, and the Seattle-Washington game, keep a close eye on the weather forecast, okay? All of these 3 games, these games being played in Green Bay, Baltimore, and Washington, the greater D.C. area, all 3 obviously in cold weather parts of the country in January, so inclement weather could and should, if it happens, really affect the way you view these games. You remember Green Bay played an outdoor game, I believe, 3 or 4 weeks ago, a primetime game. I think it was against the Detroit Lions in freezing rain, and the passing games of both teams were really affected. Green Bay won that game, but Aaron Rodgers passed for somewhere in the area of 150 yards. And Minnesota does not have a great offense as it is. They're last in the NFL in pass yards per game. So you see a total here of 46. If we find out, if you hear over the next couple days that we're expecting bad weather, inclement weather in Green Bay, I'd look at under that total, under 46, because the Vikings do have a good defense. Now, Green Bay was able to manage 34 points on that defense last week in a dome. if we get some freezing rain or some snow or something like that, some hard wind and freezing temperatures, under 46 is going to be a bet that I take a hard look at, because the Green Bay offense, as I've said many times this year, it hasn't been the same. This is not the same offense that we saw out of Green Bay last year and the year before, even though that offense has picked it up here over the last couple of weeks. 34 against Minnesota last week, 55 against Tennessee the week before last. So I'll probably stay far away from that total if the weather's decent, but I tell you what, I'll look long and hard at an under bet if it's going to be bad weather. As for the two Sunday games, as with the Green Bay game, I think we should keep a close eye on the weather in both of these games, outdoor in Baltimore, outdoor in Washington. Now, the Ravens are 6.5-point favorites over the Indianapolis Colts, 46 the total in that game. The Ravens have been very vulnerable. They've looked very vulnerable over the last couple of months. You'd probably say the most vulnerable division winner in the NFL right now, even though they did have a better record than Washington, but Washington is just rolling. But Indianapolis, are they ready to go on the road and beat Baltimore? The Colts were a different team on the road this year than they were at home. Listen, Andrew Luck had a great season. The Indianapolis Colts, they really rode Andrew Luck, really rode that right arm of his, because they were not very good on defense this year. They don't run the ball particularly well. They have an opportunity here because Baltimore, we use the word vulnerable. They have had you don't want to say a bad defense. Their defense has been bad compared to what they've been in past years. Certainly a soft defense. They haven't been ranked in the top 20 in total defense all year. Now, Ray Lewis may be coming back for this game. John Harbaugh has been very elusive when he's talked about it. So I expect Ray Lewis, who has torn triceps, we thought he might miss the entire season. Knowing Ray Lewis, knowing the way he is, hearing the non-denials come out of Baltimore this week, I do expect Ray Lewis to be in the lineup, which might not make much of a difference. Lewis has missed a couple of months now. He's getting up in years, doesn't run as well as he used to, but will make a big emotional difference, I think. Ray Lewis, the emotional leader of that Baltimore defense. And with Lewis on the field, I think it's even less likely that a rookie quarterback with a bad defense, I'm talking about Andrew Luck and the Indianapolis Colts, are able to go into Baltimore and pull out a win. But hey, we shall see. That's why they play the games. I've underestimated the Colts all season long, like I know many of you have. Now, the other game on Sunday, probably the most eagerly anticipated game of this Wildcard Weekend, the Seattle Seahawks going on the road to take on the Washington Redskins. Both these teams red hot. Seattle's won 5 in a row. Washington has won 7 in a row. The Redskins 7-0 against the spread in these last 7 games, yet they're underdogs in this game. I was a little surprised to see that. I knew the line was going to be a round pick. I thought it was going to be Washington by 2, somewhere in that area. It's actually Seattle by 2.5 on BETDAQ. People have a lot of faith in the Seahawks nowadays. A lack of faith in the Redskins, I guess, even though, as we said, Washington's won their last 7 games, 7-0 against the spread in those games. Boy, the chance to take Washington as a home underdog here, I certainly could see where that's very tempting for people, because let's not forget, the Seattle Seahawks have been a different team on the road this season. Now, Seattle's last 4 games, they have been dominant. Seattle's last 4, they're 4-0. They've averaged 42 points per game, only averaged allowing 10 points per game. So they've averaged winning by a score of 42-10 over the last 4 weeks. But keep in mind, only one of those games was not in Seattle. And that one game, their quote-unquote road game, was actually in Toronto. They played the Buffalo Bills in Toronto, where, according to the reports from that game, I don't know, I wasn't watching the game with the sound on because I was watching it in the split screen, but apparently there were just as many Seattle fans there were Buffalo fans. You probably heard the Bills players after that game complaining about having to play a quote-unquote home game in the Rogers Center in Toronto. That was in a dome. It was more of a neutral site. It was a neutral site game, had more of a bowl game atmosphere than a true road game for the Seahawks. So I'm not sure we should use that game as an example of the Seahawks on the road. They're 11-5. All 5 of their losses have come on the road. If you don't think home field advantage makes any difference, if you think that's overrated, you have not been paying attention to the Seattle Seahawks this year. And going on the road in Washington, laying points, boy, I don't know. I know it's tough to bet against the Seahawks at this point, but Washington just about has me convinced. I mean, I've been skeptical of the Redskins all season. I don't particularly like backing rookie quarterbacks. Of course, we have rookie versus rookie in this game. I like backing rookie quarterbacks even less when they're backed by a bad defense, but man, that Washington running game, the spread option attack they have going, Rookie running back Alfred Morris rushing for 200 yards on the Dallas Cowboys last week. Seattle has a much better defense in Dallas, so I don't think anybody's going to be rushing for 200 yards in this game. But man, Washington is a home underdog. Very, very tempting, and I'm sure some people are going to jump all over that here as the week progresses. Well, there you have it. There's a general overview. As I said, we'll be getting into all 4 of these games in detail over the next couple days on BETDAQ NFL. As you can probably tell, I'm excited about this weekend. I'm sure you are too.